Hi, everyone. I'm David Hood. I'm a civil environmental engineer with a good grasp of climate science and the impacts of burning fossil fuels on our atmosphere. The heating of the Earth's atmosphere as a result of infrared radiation being forced back to Earth from interaction with the greenhouse gases is now very obvious. There's no doubt in my mind that we are in a climate emergency. Society at all levels must take serious action now if we are to avoid the worst outcomes of this planetary heating. I mean, extinction of life on Earth as we know it is on the cards. And I'm sure that my guest today, Guy Lane, will agree. I've been doing all the acceptable things in an attempt to achieve change in our current destructive trajectory. I've been signing petitions, sending letters off to ministers. I've interviewed a whole lot of politicians. I've done mild protests, but I get a sense of failure. Nothing much has changed. I've now become, as a result, a non-violent protest activist with hope that we can, through activity on the street and disruption, cause some change or bringing about political change for the changes that we necessary. But I know someone who may have the answer. Guy Lane, an environmental scientist, has over the past few years evolved a concept for humanity to save itself. I'm not going to explain it. I'll leave that to Guy. So let's get straight into it. Welcome, Guy, to this little interview.
Thank you, David. Good to see you again.
First up, what exactly is your concept? And if adopted, how can it save the world?
So my reading of the climate and ecological crisis, or the poly crisis, or the Anthropocene crisis, there's different names to describe this mess that the humans have got themselves into. My reading of that is that what's the root cause of it is to do with worldview or philosophy, if you like, the philosophy that is held by millions of people. I focus mainly on Western people, but I'm sort of talking about people around the world. I say Western people predominantly because that's the culture that I come from, that I understand. So the worldview held by Western people is ecologically unsustainable. So, for example, the Christian traditions, the traditions of the beliefs in the value of capitalism and consumerism, the whole, even beliefs around, say, New Age spirituality. If you actually view these through the lens of ecological sustainability, you find that there's practically nothing of in there that helps us deal with the climate and ecological crisis. So my work over the last few years, which goes under the name Vita Sapien, Vita Sapien means life-wise, it's Latin for life-wise, has been sort of trying to explore that space. And the work that I've been doing in the last few years is to actually write a sustainable life philosophy, Vita Sapien Philosophy, but tapping into not just philosophy as ideas, but also ecological spirituality, which I regard as an extremely powerful driver of human behavior for pro-environmental behavior.
Guy, you've been calling it a religion. Given that religions, as we currently know them, all are fading from popularity, why aren't you using some other descriptor, like you mentioned, life-wise philosophy, or something that is more acceptable to people in general that are not frightened of the term religion?
Yeah, well, so the original conception of the idea that went back to an afternoon on the 18th of August 2016 was that looking at world religions, what I thought was we actually need a religion that's devoted to Gaia or to nature, whereas all of the other religions are devoted to God. That was the original conception of the idea. And I wrote an article and I posted the article about this on LinkedIn. And then I went on and did something else, forgot all about it. But a few days later, I was contacted by a guy in Malaysia that invited me to speak at an international event. And the subject that I was speaking under was gods and canons of the New Age. And so I had 2 months to prepare. So I just went through the process of actually creating the religion that I'd conceived of in the article, and then went and did my presentation and continued to work on the idea in 2020, registered a charity as a registered religious institution. So that's where it came from. What I realized then was, as you were saying, a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction to the word religion, whereas I'm not talking about religion in the way that it's normally conceived with the God and the church and all of that palaver. What I'm talking about is, when I say religion, I'm talking about the definition of religion is from the Charity Commission, the Australian Charity Commission, is a belief in a supernatural. and the acceptance of canons of conduct to give effect to the belief. Supernatural covers a great deal of territory. Yes, it includes God, so there's your Christians and so forth, but it also includes following a football team. The football fans have exactly the same characteristics as people that go to church, but football clubs aren't registered religious institutions. So when I say religion, I'm speaking of it in that sense, in the sort of the deep love, passion, and following of something, as opposed to the institutionalized ancient religions of, the mainstream religions. Now, with all that said, I realized in the early phases of working on Vita that a lot of people found that idea difficult or not palatable. And so I realized that there was a broader piece of work to be done, which was like the broader philosophy. And so then I started writing this work as life-wise philosophy. That was the term that I used. And I've gone sort of backwards and forwards with the religion philosophy thing. I'm trying to find a way to make this information accessible to people. I don't want to put them off in the first instance. And so the way it's framed at the moment, so what I'm doing, I'm in Cambodia now visiting Angkor Wat. I'm in Siem Reap.
Yep.
And what I'm doing over here is I'm writing Vita Sapien Philosophy book. So it'll be about 50,000 words. And it's framed as a philosophy, but there'll be one little section in there that says, if you take this piece and you take this piece and you follow it, then that is the practice of Vita religion. So we're just trying to reframe the whole concept to focus on the philosophy side of it. And for those people who understand my perspective of religion, then they'll find that there's a non-threatening piece of religion in there. The two pieces, if I can say, are the belief in Vitae Planeta, which is the idea of the biosphere being a single organism, which is something you can hold as a spiritual belief, but you can't prove scientifically. So it meets the supernatural test. And there are 10 practices written in the book, which are good practices, whether you're a religious person or not.
Yeah, I guess even calling it a new spirituality scares some people. I guess, why haven't you avoided all of those spooky ghost-like things that spirituality conjures up, fairies and god-evoking things? Like, the nomenclature does tend to frighten people away.
Well, firstly, the most powerful, if you were to distill the work that I'm doing down into like 2 or 3 words, it's about advancing ecological spirituality. What I realized was that, like most of the environmental movement in its communications, is all very left brain. It's all very rational about, if this happens, then that happens. If we do this, that'll happen. What I'm trying to get to is that when people have a spiritual connection to the planet, right, that motivates them to do extraordinary things to protect it. Right now, when I say spiritual, again, I get a lot of blowback because not everybody accepts that they have spirituality. I was talking to an engineer last night, and he says, "Are you telling me that I actually have spirituality as well?" I said, "Well, in the view of Vita Sapien, it is one of the faculties of a human being. It's one of the things that makes us modern human beings. It's this capacity for art and for caring and funerary practices. And its evolution in the human central nervous system with language was around 70,000 years ago. And this is recognized in the remains left behind of these cultures, where there was an explosion of innovation and creativity and artistry and funerary practices. And so spirituality and innovation and engineering capabilities and mathematical capabilities of the human mind, in my view, are all part of a matrix of cognitive capacities that evolved around 70,000 years ago. Okay, so we all have spirituality. Now, a lot of people don't like talking about spirituality because they associate it with the church. Okay.
Yeah.
When in reality it's extremely broad. You spend time working with Aboriginal people, right? They have a very clear spirituality grounded in the ecosystem of their territory. And that's really what I'm trying to explore in this work. How do you take something like indigenous spirituality, connection to nature, and apply that into the lifestyle of a Western person who has much less association with Earth, with place, but still has an association with the biosphere?
I guess in reading through some of your stuff that I don't get a connection with our indigenous cultures. You mention it, but you don't then explore it, like bringing an indigenous person in to help you develop the relationship with land that they have and how the feelings come from within. and
Yeah.
they become part of the land and part of nature. It's very built into their psyche, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the first and most important part of that is the concept of Vita Planeta, which is the idea that all the living things on the planet are part of a single organism, which creates this sense of
Mm.
oneness, which is, I think, is at the heart of indigenous philosophy. Is that, for example, if they see the forest with the indigenous people in it, they're a part of the forest, whereas Western
Yeah,
people would tend to see a forest with people walking in it, that the
yeah.
people are apart from the forest.
Outside of the forest, yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to bring across is that we're by virtue of being living beings on this planet, we are all part of the ecosystem, and the ecosystem is regarded in this spiritual sense as a single living entity of which we are parts. That itself is tying in with indigenous worldview.
Do you think, I get the sense that you don't have in the your material and the resources you have on the website any indication of Indigenous involvement in what you're doing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's because you feel that their spirituality would frighten people away, frighten the Western culture away. Is that a thought you've had?
No, 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 no. I think I've yet to properly bring indigenous people into Vita Sapien. Okay. Um,
Yeah,
so there's more to be done there. Okay. Now I just want to frame a few things.
good.
I've got
Yep.
a
No, I agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I've got a keen eye on marketing, which is why I'm happy to try and find the right words to describe the thing that I'm doing. Um,
yep,
and so, for example, if I were to start putting up banners of Aboriginal Australian people on the website, it would then basically appear to be an Aboriginal Australian brand, and that's not what it's about. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get to the common heart of Indigenous worldview, as opposed to showcasing a particular tribe or culture, right?
you
So
don't start blackwashing.
that's the other thing as well. So I'm also very
Yeah,
cautious about cultural appropriation, and so that's
yep,
why when I find the way to bring the indigenous view into Vita Sapien, I'm going to find a way to do it so I'm not ending up stealing ideas or passing off and so forth. So I'm trying to be very cautious to honor and respect indigenous people. But at the end of the day, the central philosophy that I'm putting forward is a philosophy that is shared by many people who aren't indigenous. Okay, I've just
yeah,
talked about it. So it's like, so a lot of Western people, not a lot, a small proportion of Western people resonate with the work that I'm doing because they already think that way. Okay,
yeah.
so
Mm.
what I'm saying is that indigenous worldview is not the only worldview that sees humans as being part of the biosphere.
But a good connection with First Nations people generally around the world, like Canadian, the Inuit people, that sort of thing. You could integrate that in
Yeah.
without sort of being seen as an Australian thing only. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, that's right. And I
Yeah.
have yet to do that. I
Yeah.
have yet to do that, and it's coming. And it's a slow. I've been working on this for 7 years, but sort of full time for 3 years. And every little step forward is kind of hard won. I've got to think through. I've got
Yeah.
to bring ideas in. I've got to knead them into the work, so you don't have like these
Yeah.
lumps that sit on the outside. And I've yet to find the right people to talk to. And what I was
Yeah.
sort of
Okay.
looking for was like an international association of Indigenous people, and that way
Yep.
I'd
You've
be able
mentioned
to
that
talk.
before.
That way I'd be able to speak about indigeneity as a broad concept, as opposed to the specifics of an individual culture.
Mm.
Yeah.
You mentioned names before, and you seem to use a lot of strange terms to people. Things like Imperium, Vita Planeta, Pananema,
Pan
Rapid,
anima.
Massic, Copenhagen, Latent Vitans,
Yeah.
Syzygy, The Flux, Earthity, Vetan, Chivalry, Verdant Age, and so on.
You've been reading the
These
book.
terms, these terms are mostly unknown to people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
why are you using them? Because people would read it and say, "Oh God, no, I'm not interested in that." So, is
So
there another way of approaching it that doesn't sort of frighten people away with new terms?
so firstly, when I started working on this concept, the idea of a Gaia-based religion or a Gaia-based philosophy, what I
Yeah.
realized was that the Gaia, the expression, comes with a
Yep.
lot of baggage. It comes with a lot of hippie baggage. It comes with a lot of cultural history. There's a whole bunch of different people talking about it. What I wanted to do from the outset was to create this idea with a whole new brand, a whole new conception,
Mm.
that when you come into Vita Sapien, what's written in the book, it's all new. Okay. There was also concepts that were important that didn't have a name that I gave a name to. So ecophany, for example, we talked about ecophany, is this idea of a spiritual awakening to nature, and it's formed from the word ecological and epiphany. That
Yeah.
word, incidentally, I started using in 2016. I found recently it's found its way into a peer-reviewed anthropology science paper. And the title
Wow.
is From Ecophany to Burnout. And it's an anthropologist who joined a climate activist group, right? And went through the whole emotional awakening to climate and the planet, which is the ecophany, and then went into the game that you're in, got involved in, the street protests, and eventually got burned out and sat down and reflected and wrote a peer-reviewed science paper. So the term ecophany has now actually found its way into academic language, if you like. And that was via,
But not
yeah.
not the masses yet.
No, that's fine. So the concept of ecophany was the idea that when people have a spiritual awakening to nature in its various forms, that prompts them to start acting on behalf of nature. So the work that we're trying to do with Vita Sapien is to foster ecophany in individuals, to try and create the conditions where they have that. But in order for
Yeah.
that to have effect in changing the outcome of the planet, it needs to be done very fast. So that's rapid ecophany, and it needs to be done en masse, fostering rapid mass ecophany. So the words are unfamiliar, but when you read through the book and you open yourself to the work, then you'll come to understand it, and you'll realize that that is the right terminology. Okay,
I guess
so
I know, and I certainly understand it, having read lots of your work. But maybe, as you mentioned before, a marketing approach to this is definitely needed if you're to get into the masses, and start
yeah,
getting people to convert.
yeah.
And I mean, I'm right behind what you're doing, because we need people to change, and we need the system change that you and I would agree is needed, is necessary. What about flux? What just explain flux to people?
Okay, just one more thing back on that previous point. So up until
Yeah.
now, all of the work in Vita Sapien has been done by myself, with some support of yourself and others. Okay, but it's
Yep.
just me. So I've never had the opportunity to sit in a boardroom with a bunch of really smart marketing and communications people to actually map out target audiences and da da da. This has been done on a shoestring budget, and this is as good as I've been able to get it. The aspiration is to find a proper resourcing through philanthropical donation or a benefactor of some sort, then actually take it right to the next level, which is to figure out how to communicate the core ideas to the public, find target sectors, marketing and advertising, and then it transforms. And I let go of everything that needs to be let go of through that process. Okay, so
Okay. Yeah.
excuse that it's clumsy. It's as best that I can do it at the moment on my own. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I
so
understand that.
okay, so back to one of the other terms, which is flux or biophysical flux.
Yeah.
Um, it's a principle that, as we are part of a global ecosystem, then when we die, the minerals and energy in our body should be returned back into the ecosystem from where it came. So the human being is an assemblage of molecules that have been drawn from the atmosphere through the plants,
Mm.
and the soils, and so forth. And so we are the custodians of that energy and those minerals during our life. But the idea is that a Vetan burial would involve some process by which you would basically be interred back into the soil, that your body would break
Composting.
down. Well, not the greatest word to use, David, but that's
Yeah.
what was got in mind. And so
Yeah.
the standard green burial, like I'll give an example. My father passed in 2005, and his process was the opposite of what I'm talking about. So father's
Yeah.
ashes remain in a plastic bucket on my shed in Noosa. I tried to
Yeah.
sprinkle some in the Cleveland Bay off the back of my mate's catamaran, but the wind blew the ashes in my face, so we gave up on that. Okay, and also when he was cremated, he was put in a it was like a plywood casket with little plastic gold handles, and he was wearing
Oh no. Yeah.
polyester. And so we basically, and he was combusted using gas. So that whole process was ecologically unsustainable in as many ways as you can think.
Agreed. Yep.
And the poor bugger now sits still in the plastic bucket. So imagine that is what we should not be doing from a Vetan funerary perspective.
We can still compost him, put him
Well,
back into the soil somewhere.
absolutely, yeah. And there's processes. There's a company called Recompose, which has got an advanced high temperature composting process. It takes about a week, and you end up with basically a barrow full of humus that can go into soils, or you can just bury people in the ground. That's the old way of doing it, but wrap them in cotton. And so that's the idea of how do you respect this philosophy about being part of nature through funerary practice. And the idea is that the body breaks down and goes back into the flux. And the flux is basically the biophysical molecular movement of molecules and minerals going through the soil. So back to your entropy sort of idea that a structure has low entropy, but when that structure is dissolved, it has high entropy. So basically, your body is broken apart into its molecular form, releasing its energy into the high entropy space from which order and plant life grows out again. That's the idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about syzygy?
Well, that's not my word. That is a word from cosmology. And so syzygy is the alignment of three astronomical bodies like the sun, moon, and the Earth on a full moon, for example.
Back to marketing, and this is where you will need marketing. You talk about having 53 million latent Vitans out there in the world.
Yeah.
Where did you get that figure from? And can you explain how you would mobilize them? Because in that 53 million Western latent Vitans are bound to be coal barons and wealthy fossil fuel executives. How do you convert them?
Yeah. So, okay. So firstly, when I was putting the paperwork in through the Charity Commission, one of the questions they gave me was, how many followers of the Vetan religion are there? Well, which is a bit unfair because we haven't even started the Vetan religion. Yeah. So I said, look, I've got a small network of people that, listen to what I say, call them followers or not. I can't answer that. But I said, I conceive that the work that I'm doing, the nature of the work that I'm doing will have an audience in the West, in Western adults. And one of the frames of reference that I use is called cultural creatives. It's a work from 2000. A couple of sociologists worked on this, working with the American EPA, looking at messaging for people for environmental issues. And they found that there were basically three psychographics in American culture. A psychographic is a way of seeing the world, right? So most 55% were moderns. These are people for whom they see the world as just fine the way it is. They're really good with finance. They live modern Western lifestyles. Around 15% were conservatives, not political conservatives. This is the psychographic conservative, who sort of tend to hark back to the old times. But then around 35% were cultural creatives. And the cultural creatives were people whom there's a little questionnaire in the back of the book. And if you answer 19 out of the 20 questions in the affirmative, that you're a cultural creative. And it's like, do you care about the environment? Do you care about women? Do you care about indigenous people? Are you prepared to make sacrifices in your life to achieve a better world? Okay, so that's the class of people. So my thinking was a quarter of the cultural creatives, just to create a number, a quarter of the cultural creatives would love this work and would adopt it as their primary life philosophy. Let me just address that life philosophy idea. The work that I'm doing is framed around the concept of Stoicism. Stoicism was a life philosophy founded by Zeno of Citium back in the ancient Greece times. It was a philosophy that sought the pursuit of eudaimonia. Eudaimonia was living a good life, how to live a life that is good for you and how to live a life that is good for the society in which you live. Stoicism came to be the main philosophy of the educated classes of the early Roman period. Marcus Aurelius and a couple of the other emperors were Stoics. Marcus Aurelius wrote about Stoicism in his book called Meditations. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a philosophy that becomes the foundational philosophy for Western civilization that is grounded in a love and respect for the life support system of the human beings. Right. So that's the nature of the work. It's non-exclusionary. So you can be a
Mm.
Christian and hold these Vetan beliefs, right? Or
Yeah.
hold the or subscribe to the Vetan philosophy. So my friend in New South Wales, who's a forestry guy, he deeply loves forests, understands and loves nature and the biosphere. He's a devout Christian. Okay. I said, "You're a Vetan Christian." He said, "Sure, or maybe I'm a Christian Vetan." Let's argue about that some other time, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the idea. It's a non-exclusionary belief, but it's meant to be a foundational belief, okay, that you can then add whatever you like on the top, okay?
Yeah.
And ultimately it's incredibly rational, because at the heart of what I'm trying to do is to help people to accept philosophically and spiritually that we should protect our life support system.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I used to be an altar boy in the Anglican Church as a 14-year-old, and I just remember all the trappings and the things in the conduct you had to go through and all the bloody stuff you had to wear, etc. Um, I'm just thinking, do you really expect the masses of ordinary people who are already shunning these religious practices that they will adopt canons of conduct that the Vita proposes for its adherents?
Well, firstly, it's not important whether they look at that. I call them practices, not technically.
Practices, yeah,
Technically, in the definition from the Charity Commission,
of
they're
course, yeah,
canons of conduct. All of the Charity Commission work regarding religion is all focused around Christianity terminology. Okay,
yeah,
so for example, it says it makes reference to a seminary, which is a place where you go to learn about a religious tradition, and it says, for example, a church, a Bible school, right? So the whole framing of the language that I've been used or coached with from the Charity Commission has been um, around Christian language. Okay, so I use the word
yeah,
practices. And the thing about the practices is that people can read them and go, hey, that makes sense. Hey, that makes sense. Hey,
mm,
I'm not sure about that one. We're not in the game of forcing anybody to do anything. It's like an offering. We give people the offering. They can read the philosophy. They can think about the spiritual connection to the supernatural, the Vitae Planeta.
mm.
They can look at they can take it or leave it. There's no gun at anybody's head. Now, if somebody were a proportion of people, like imagine a bell curve, a small proportion of people will be deeply passionate about it, and they will follow the practices to the letter because they have a religious inclination, and it's all right there if they want to have a religious inclination. If you're more of
Yeah,
a secular person that just likes the philosophy, that's probably going to be the most of the people. But it's all there. What I've tried to create was that you can come into this space, and depending on what your inclinations are, it's all there available for you, which is why I persist with the
pick up.
religious part of it and also persist with the main focus on the philosophy. Back to the
Yeah,
53 million, a quarter
mm,
of the cultural creatives in the West is 53 million people. That's around
gotcha.
8% of the Western adults. Okay. And
Mm,
I think that's sound. I think that's sound because what I'm offering is something that doesn't really exist yet. It's like a nicely thought through life philosophy that helps to ground you in advancing an ecological civilization or saving the planet or whatever you want to call it. And of
yeah,
course, the outcome that we're looking for is the Verdant Age, which is the potential
mm,
future time when humans and the biosphere live in balance
in synergy. Yeah,
and synergy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you bring in weapons to
The
Vegan practice?
archery.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I bring in the Vetan archery from a perspective of hand-eye coordination, health and fitness, social inclusion, fun activity, but also there is a spiritual aspect to archery, and also archery was one of the early evidences of the origins of spirituality. Remember when I'm saying that spirituality evolved in conjunction with the engineering capabilities and the opening of the
mm,
brain to do all these things, the
yep,
earliest evidence of those people is actually stone arrowheads. Because the artifacts that they made out of bone or wood or fabrics are long gone, but stone arrowheads. So there's a whole bunch of different threads that bring in. One of the other principles, and this is important as well, is one of the practices is called um, reinvent new year. The idea of reinvent new
Yep.
year is to look at all institutions. You see, to have gone from a relatively ecologically sustainable civilization pre-industrial times, say 1600s, to the near collapse of the ecosystem and the heat death of most life on Earth in 250
Yeah.
years required all institutions to be in on the murder. So
Yeah.
the call of Reinvent New Year is to look at all institutions and find the sustainable version of them. Now, if you go into an archery shop, you'll see that nearly everything is made of plastic or aluminium or composites.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what Vita Archery is this idea of let's go back to traditional materials, wood, you know, hemp for the string and so forth. And let's have archery that's only made out of wood materials, all right, as a way of actually advancing archery, but also advancing sustainability.
Okay.
And okay,
Yeah.
so Verdant Archery is the thing that I developed a passion over. So that's, and
Yeah.
it's in here. And there's a whole bunch of other ties in as well. But you could have, what's the Vegan version of football? What's the vegan version of recreational fishing? That's the
Just
idea
about
of
to mention,
reinventing,
yeah,
yeah.
have a vegan netball, for instance.
Well, I
Sort of
mean, what
netball
does
is a
that
bit
look
more
like?
harmless than
Maybe the
football.
ball isn't made of plastic, for example, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Guy, a lot of people I talk to kick back when I try to enthuse them about Vita Sapien. How do you dispel the thought in people's minds that this is suggestive of a cult-like movement? And I've mentioned, we've discussed this in the past. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not in the game of trying to dispel people or otherwise. I put my work out and they can think of it what they like. The people that think of this as a cult are not going to be the sort of people that are in the 8% of the Western adults. I'm really not that worried about it. I got a pretty thick skin, and so it's not something that I worry about. The people who talk about this as a cult normally do it as a dismissive tongue-in-cheek sort of thing, like,
Yeah.
get out of
Yeah.
my face, you cultist, right? I'm not interested for whatever reason, and here's a small insult for you as you leave the door. I don't care about that. Okay. A cult really is when you take a spiritual philosophy that is advanced by an individual, and when that individual is the object of devotion of the spiritual movement. And they typically are charismatic and authoritarian. Now, I can be charismatic sometimes and occasionally authoritarian, right? But that's, you know, but I'm not advancing a spiritual belief that people that comes from me. I'm simply a messenger. I don't even want them to. I don't want them to worship me. I don't want them to worship Vita Sapien. I want them to worship the planet. And I don't even
Nature.
like the
Yeah.
word. I don't even like the word worship. Honor and
Oh,
respect
yeah.
the planet. Okay, I'm just the guy that stumbled across this and wrote it down and put the effort in to bring it forward. This is about connecting people spiritually and intellectually and emotionally to the well-being of the biosphere. Okay, so it just
Yep.
simply isn't a cult. Now, one thing people will say is, "Oh, I look at your website and it's your face everywhere. You know, it looks cultish because it's you." Like I say, I've done this on the back of my own dime. I don't have a videography team with half a dozen actors to choose from, and I'll get them as I've got the resources. I want to do some of the direct communication, but other communication will come from other people, and including
Yeah.
some of my avatars. You know, I have a penchant for
Yeah. I've
online
seen some
avatars.
of them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So how are you going on? How are you going on that front of actually mobilizing the resources that you need to get this out there?
Oh,
Really get it.
thoroughly unsuccessful. So when I was at COP28, I went in pursuit of Twiggy Forrest. He had a boat in the marina. And
Yep.
after I did the Vita Religion launch at COP28, I was like really zonked. I had a glass of wine and then off on the adventure. Got to the ship, annoyed got the captain out of bed, who agreed to give me a contact number. So I pursued Twiggy. I met one of Twiggy's men online. Nothing's come from that. When I was in the UK, I was pursuing a guy called Dale Vince, who's a fascinating guy that runs a green electricity company and also a vegan football team. And he's like,
Yeah.
I thought he would actually be, of all the people in the world, the most resonant, but I just couldn't get through to them. I just haven't been able to break through the force field of a green billionaire yet, or even a green multimillionaire. So like, 8 out of 10 for creating the philosophy, 0 out of 10 for getting it funded. And I just don't
Okay.
think that it's possible for this thing to grow. It's conceivable it will grow on its own organically, but it won't grow
Yep.
far and fast enough to have a meaningful impact on the planet unless it gets properly boosted. So I just keep working on that and then pursue billionaires when I come across them.
We have less than 2 minutes left on
Yeah.
this Zoom. So thank you so much, Guy, for that discussion. It's
Yeah,
been
that's
very
great.
enlightening.
Great questions.
And
Yeah.
it's answered a few questions in my mind, as you and I've had lots
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
discussions on
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I wish you all the very best in this pursuit of yours, and I hope that something soon comes of it. Because God knows, sorry, didn't mean to mention God.
Gaia knows.
we Gaia knows we need a solution fast. We need
Yes.
it now,
Yes.
for
Yeah.
instance.
And it has to be foundational. It has to get to the root of the problem rather than dealing with all of the symptoms.